Under the hot desert sun, child psychologist Catherine rides a black horse that transforms into a statue when she gets off. Then she begins walking towards a light that comes from the reflection of a locket in Edward's hands. Catherine thanks him for the horse and reminds Edward that they were supposed to be sailing today, so after ignoring an old abandoned ship, she picks up a small toy one. Edward refuses to go though, saying the boogeyman won't let him, and after his face morphs into a more monstrous form, he runs away. Seeing no more progress can be done today, Catherine presses a chip hidden under her skin, and suddenly she appears inside a lab. The desert had been Edward's mindscape, and Catherine has been using a special machine invented by doctors Henry and Miriam that allows her to enter a patient's mind. Edward is in a coma and the machine should theoretically help them bring him back to consciousness, but there hasn't been any progress so far. After so many months of trying, Edward's parents are starting to get frustrated because they have no reason to believe the treatment's been anything but a hallucination, so they're considering taking Edward to a normal hospital. This upsets Catherine because she's very devoted to the boy. Moments later, Miriam informs Catherine that they've managed to negotiate another 6 months to keep trying, which prompts Catherine to mention the possibility of reversing the feed and bringing Edward into her own mind, but Miriam refuses because it's too dangerous for both of them. Later in the evening, Catherine tries to forget about everything by relaxing at home, but when she falls asleep she keeps having nightmares of Edward in his monstrous form. Meanwhile, Carl and his dog drive to an abandoned building in the middle of the countryside. Here, Carl keeps his latest victim inside a water tank. All the women he kidnaps reach the same end. He puts them in the tank and slowly fills it with water until they die. All this is recorded by a camera. This girl is dead by the time he arrives, and after controlling his body's naughty reaction to the sight, Carl takes the body away in his truck back to his house, where he washes it thoroughly with bleach before using it together with the tapes of her death to satisfy his dirty needs. Sometime later, the FBI finds the body under a bridge, and they immediately know this is the 7th victim left by the serial killer they've been looking for months. Like all the others, this woman is very doll-like and has a special collar that the killer makes for them to feel like he owns them. The skid marks fit the vehicle they've been identified so far too. FBI agent Peter is so obsessed with this case that lately he started to sleep in the station. When the forensic report comes later, they find the usual clues, including a match for the criminal's seed, but Peter gets excited when they finally get something new. There was a dog hair that has been identified as belonging to an albino dog. There aren't many of those around, so it should be easy to find. Meanwhile, Carl is downtown following his next possible victim, a beautiful woman named Julia. Whenever his body starts reacting to the sight, he takes some medicine to calm it down. He waits for Julia to be alone in the parking lot and sends his dog to rest behind her car to whine. That way Julia thinks she accidentally hit it and comes out to check on it. While she's distracted by the dog, Carl surprises Julia from behind and kidnaps her. The FBI quickly hears about the new disappearance and Peter puts as many men as possible on the job to interrogate Ford dealers and dog breeders. Peter has noticed the criminal is getting sloppy, and the victims are showing up dead more quickly each time, so they may not have much time left. Afterward, Peter goes to see Julia's family, who give him a picture of her but don't know anything about any possible stalkers. Suddenly the agents get a very important call that changes things. A sheriff in Woodcrest found a breeder that sold an albino dog 3 years ago. And when the sheriff checked the buyer's DMV, he confirmed his vehicle matched the model they're looking for. Peter and his team immediately travel to Edison, where Carl has finally been identified and a SWAT team has already surrounded his house. Now they're just waiting for the right moment to strike. In the meantime, Carl is having a bath when his body suddenly begins suffering from a seizure. The medicine bottle he left next to the tub is empty, so he has to leave the bathroom and look for a refill. Unfortunately, he doesn't make it in time, and by the time the FBI finally force their way into the house, Carl is unconscious on the floor. While the forensics unit takes Carl away, Peter and his men search the house, but Julia isn't there. They do find the dog, and lots of creepy toys in the basement together with the tapes and the bleach Carl uses to wash the bodies. There's also a hoist with the logo of a company named Carver. Back in the abandoned building, Julia wakes up in the empty tank, but nobody can hear her scream. Sometime later, a doctor explains to the agents that Carl suffers from Whelan's infraction, a very rare and severe form of schizophrenia. It's caused by a dormant virus that's triggered by trauma, usually water-related, and it can't be treated by normal medicine. Carl isn't just unconscious, he's disappeared into his own mind forever. Peter gets angry because after seeing the tapes, he knows Julia probably doesn't have much more than 24 hours left, so they need to find her fast. This prompts the doctor to tell them about Catherine and the machine. After Peter gets approval from the board of directors plus Miriam and Henry, it's up to Catherine to decide if she wants to confront the dangers she may find in Carl's mind. Catherine's hesitant because when it comes to a mind with schizophrenia, there's no discerning between fantasy and reality, and sometimes it takes months for such a mind to trust her and let her in. That said, after seeing the tapes too, Catherine decides to give it a try. While Catherine and Carl are put into the special suits and connected to the machine, Henry explains to the agents how the machine works, mentioning lots of technobabble about the neurological cartography and synaptic transfer system that the agents can barely grasp. Once the machine is turned on, Catherine's mind is sent into Carl's and she immediately gets to see a memory of Carl being baptized in a lake before she appears inside a creepy tunnel, her face covered by a religious veil. There's a small toy house nearby from which Catherine can hear the voice of a very angry man scolding a child, plus a black dog near a tub filled with bloody water. Before Catherine can start analyzing what these images mean, she hears a noise and turns around to see younger Carl running away from her by climbing a giant set of stairs. Catherine follows him into a room full of clocks where Carl is petting a horse. She tries to connect with the boy by using kind words, but Carl is too shy and scared to chat back. When a clock's timer suddenly goes off, Carl pushes Catherine away from the horse, knowing what will happen next. A series of glass panels come down and divide the horse into multiple slices. Afterward, Carl runs again, and this time Catherine follows him into a very creepy room where she finds all of Carl's previous victims inside tanks. Catherine presses a button next to one of these tanks, which takes away the lids and shows that instead of being in water, here all the victims have been put into disturbing clothes and other paraphernalia. Also, they all are wearing Carl's collars. One of these victims is a bodybuilder that manages to leave the tank after the button was pressed, so now she approaches Catherine from behind and knocks her out before taking her to a mysterious throne room. In this room, a demonic king-like idealization of Carl's murderous side occupies the throne, and when the woman leaves Catherine on the steps, he comes closer to demand answers. Catherine is horrified by the sight and presses the chip in her hand to wake up. Miriam checks on Catherine to confirm she's okay while Henry explains to Peter how dangerous Carl's mind turned out to be. If Catherine came to believe his mindscape was real the same way he does, she could be trapped there forever or even die. Meanwhile, in the abandoned house, the timer goes off and Julia's tank begins to slowly fill with water. Back to Catherine, she's taking a break to calm her mind by visiting Edward. Instead of letting her rest, Peter goes to talk to her to remind her they don't have time to spare. Catherine explains Carl isn't Carl anymore, he's just a twisted version of himself, then takes Peter outside so they can talk in private. Peter shares he understands how disturbing these cases can be. He used to be a prosecutor and had a case of a girl that had been taken advantage of by a grown man. The criminal got to walk free because of tainted evidence, and when the girl's parents returned home one night, they found the criminal watching television with the dead girl next to him. That's when he decided to join the FBI, that way he could catch these guys. In return, Catherine confesses Carl isn't completely gone. The evil king is the dominant personality in charge of the mindscape, but his child side is still around, so she's willing to try to get in contact with him again. Carl thanks her for her efforts and tells his colleagues they aren't taking Carl away yet. He also brings the dog into the room to see if it can have a positive effect on Carl while he's under. When the machine activates once more, Catherine is shocked to see she's still in the lab, and Henry explains they have a power problem so she'll have to check the circuit breaker. As she walks away from the table, she notices the place getting bigger, and when she turns around she sees herself. It turns out she is in Carl's mind after all, and he's trying to trick her. As soon as Catherine calls him out for it, she's moved into a glass box from which she immediately jumps out, only to suddenly be hanging from her ankles inside a tunnel while wearing a red dress. Catherine cuts the rope and slowly floats down to an antique room, where the dog comes to welcome her. Catherine asks the dog to take her to Carl, and that's when Carl's childhood home appears. Not wearing the dress anymore, Catherine goes through the door and finds Carl drying the dishes, so she takes the chance to give him a locket like she had done with Edward, that way he can use it to get her help if he ever needs it. Reaching for the locket causes Carl to drop a dish and break it, which gets Carl's dad's attention. Little Carl immediately hides Catherine in the closet, where a bowl full of water and eels appears under her feet while she watches Carl's awful memories of his childhood. Carl's dad yelled at him and hit him over any little mistake. He also lived with a woman that wasn't Carl's mother. The man reminded Carl all the time that his real mother didn't love him and that's why she left, and he would push Carl against his current girlfriend's private so he could learn what a real woman was like. If Carl was found doing anything his dad would think of as girly, like playing with a doll, the man would bring out the worst punishments, like using a hot iron. Catherine watches it all with tears in her eyes while strange things begin happening at her back. First a picture of an abandoned room with a tub appears, then the real room shows up when the memories are over. Adult Carl is in that room with his albino puppy, taking care of the first victim's body, and Catherine approaches him slowly as she swears he's here to help. Carl doesn't believe her and insults her, thus when Catherine says he sounds like his father, he shares an anecdote. When he was baptized, his father pushed him underwater and he had some kind of seizure, but nobody did anything. Afterward, his father took him home and broke his ribs and jaw. Catherine explains that what his father did was evil and nobody deserves such treatment, thus Carl should tell her where Julia is. Hearing the name makes Carl uncomfortable and he walks back into the shadows, but a second later, a new demonic Carl appears and pushes Catherine down to put one of his collars on her. Meanwhile, Julia continues to panic inside the tank, trying her best to move any of the glass panels to no avail. In the lab, Miriam and Henry discover Catherine's mind has been captured by Carl's headspace. They can't just disconnect her because it would kill her, so they need someone to go after her. Miriam and Henry need to stay at the computer to control everything, which prompts Peter to volunteer. After Miriam puts the chip in his hand, Peter is connected to the machine, and he finds himself in a dark desert where three doll-like women representing Carl's mother talk about what an abomination he is. When Peter starts to move, he follows a light into a fancy room, where little Carl is using the locket to guide him. After the boy runs away, Peter finds Catherine, who has been assimilated into the mindscape and tries to get busy with him. While Catherine keeps Peter distracted, King Carl shows up again and captures the detective to bring him to a special table where he puts him through the most excruciating pain. Peter talks to Catherine to try to make her snap out of it, using details of her private life he found on her file to remind her this isn't real. The trick works and Catherine becomes herself again, then approaches Carl's painful tools and uses one to stab him. As Carl screams in pain, Catherine shakes Peter out of the table, and the two of them suddenly appear in a water room where a tank with the equivalent of Julia floats. Little Carl is there too, suffering from the same wound Catherine just inflicted on King Carl. While Catherine comforts the boy, who doesn't know where this tank is in the real world, Peter looks around and notices the same Carver logo that he had seen in Carl's real basement. This is the clue he needs to find Julia, so he's ready to leave, but Catherine doesn't want to go yet because she doesn't want to leave little Carl alone. King Carl suddenly shows up and takes his child self away while Peter activates the chips and brings both himself and Catherine back to the real world. As soon as Peter wakes up, he doesn't let the doctors check on him. He rushes back to work since he knows Julia's tank is in the process of filling up. He calls one of the agents that is keeping watch at Carl's house and asks him to look for the logo, confirming it's from a company called Carver that works in California. Peter orders his men to contact the company to find out everything about the man that bought that equipment, then he leaves the lab to join the team in the search. When Miriam and Henry hear Peter is leaving without a checkup, they go after him, giving Catherine the chance to do whatever she wants without anyone stopping her. After locking the door, she reconfigures the machine to reverse the feed, and when she connects herself to Carl again, she brings him into her own mind. Inspired by a saint card she saw near the instruction manual, Catherine presents herself dressed as Virgin Mary to look welcoming and safe. She also wears the locket around her neck so its light can guide little Carl to her. The boy wants to stay there with her, and when Catherine explains it's not possible, the boy becomes an older but still sane Carl, who tells her about the time he put a bird with a broken leg in the sink as mercy killing because he knew his father would do something horrible to it otherwise. Catherine refuses to do the same to him, and Carl reverses to his child self as creepy crawlers appear all over his body, meaning King Carl has found them. In the meantime, the FBI discovers the Carver equipment had been bought by a factory that went bankrupt. When the state took over the land, they hired a man to seal the place up, which turns out to be Carl. There isn't much empty space left for Julia in the tank, but when Peter arrives at the building and searches every corner, he still can't find her. He's about to leave when he notices a machine outside that is connected to the underground, and by following it he manages to find a trapdoor. Peter gets inside and finally finds Julia, so he wastes no time in telling her to move back in order for him to shoot the tank. The bullets crack the glass but don't break it, thus Peter grabs a pipe instead and hits the tank until it finally breaks. Then he holds a panicking Julia close to assure her it's safe now. Back in Catherine's mindscape, she changes into warrior clothes to fight Carl with a mix of arrows and well-landed hits. Since this is her world, she's the dominant one. She ends King Carl with a sword, which hurts the kid as well, but King Carl is convinced this isn't real and he can't be killed. Catherine rushes to check on little Carl dressed as Virgin Mary again, and when the boy asks for salvation, Catherine finally accepts that mercy killing is the only option. Once she's picked up little Carl, she takes him to a fountain and lowers him into the water, allowing him to finally find peace. Seconds later, Catherine wakes up in the real world and cries her heart out over what she had to do. A few days later, while the FBI is still gathering all the evidence in Carl's messy house, Catherine shows up with the excuse to visit Peter, but what she wants is to see Carl's home with her own eyes. Peter is happy to hear Catherine has good news. She's keeping Carl's dog, and the lab has finally allowed her to reverse the feed with Edward since she's proven she can handle it with Carl. In return, Peter shares he's under inquiry and that he'll be a civilian for a few days. The FBI's official story is that the lab put Peter under the influence to trigger some old memories, and Julia was found thanks to traditional detective work. The two of them are grateful for the other's help and say goodbye with a hug. The next time Catherine connects to Edward, she brings him to her headspace and prepares a boat to finally go sailing without having to worry about any interrupting monsters. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.